Hello everyone, this is the fifth and final video of this video series on Introduction to Java. In this video we're going to primarily focus on understanding source control, and it's basically keeping track of the changes that we make to our code. So we'll talk about Git, how to install Git, and how to use a Git effectively, and we'll briefly wrap up with talking about branching and how you can actually experiment with code using a branching strategy. Alright, before we actually start talking about Git and version control, what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and go to github.com and create an account. Once you create that account, just make sure you logged in, because we're going to revisit that later in the video here. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue the PowerPoint here. I'm going to jump forward to our slides. So utilizing source control or version control, whatever term you prefer, we're going to be using Git to version control the various programs you'll create and submit. You may have heard of a version control tool called Subversion. There's one called Git, and I would say Git is by far one of the more popular version control tools that you can use to keep track of the various changes to your applications. What I want to do is just dive right in and installing Git and actually run it through a few commands, and then we'll get back into some of the, like, what is Git useful for, or really understanding the makeup of Git, if that makes any sense. So what I want to do here is go ahead and go to git.scm.com. We're going to download that onto our local machine. It's going to imply which version that you should download based on what computer you use to navigate to this website from. So click on download for whatever operating system you're using. In this case, I'm using Windows, so I'll download for Windows. And this is a computer that doesn't have Git installed on it, so you'll see me walk through the full process, the full installation process here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this top link here for the latest version. It's going to bring up this executable file, and I'll click Run. And I'll pause while that downloads here. Alright, so here's my installation screen. And you'll see that I have some slides dedicated to this. But I'll just walk through this here. This is going to be the location where it installs at. I'll click Next. It's going to give me the Git bash here, and also give me a GUI. We'll do everything from terminal at the command line. So I'll click Next. This is the wordage, or the characters you will type in to search for Git, and you have it installed. Here I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. It's my default editor. I'll let Git decide. And I'll just keep these here as basically the ones that they have selected. I'll just keep those standard. I won't select anything different than what they recommend here. So I'm just clicking through. I won't do any experimental options at this point. I'll just click Install. And I'll pause this video so that I'm not taking precious time of recording, and I'll pick back up here. Alright, so now that Git is done installing, I'm going to press Finish, and this wants to basically bring up a window that shares some more information about Git. I'm going to click out of there or minimize it. And at this point, let's jump back into the PowerPoint. We have Git installed, and just to double check to make sure that you do have Git installed, if you just go to your desktop, this is my desktop at the moment, I'll right click. And you'll see that you should have these two options here, Git GUI here or Git bash here. Go ahead and click on Git bash here. It'll bring up your GUI terminal, or I'm sorry, your Git bash terminal, and you can say version. I'm sorry, Git -v. Oops, Git. There's only one hyphen there, and then it'll show you what Git version you have. And at this point, I have 2.37. Which is the Git version I have. Okay, we'll come back to that in just a second. Let's click off of there. Let's jump back into the PowerPoint. Here's just the steps that we just went through in terms of the installation. A lot of you are going to keep as the default configuration. And then what I would like for you to do is download this sheet here. It's basically some of the most commonly used Git commands you typically would use when keeping track of the different versions of your project, or the commands you would run most often. So here I'll just right click and open a new terminal. Open a new tab. And here's the sheet. And I'm going to run through some of these commands that will be useful for us as we keep track of our programs and make commits and so forth. So here's the Git workflow. I'm going to see you walk through this. I think it's better. I'll show you, and then you can kind of see how this works here. But essentially, you have these different stages. You have local, and then you have remote. The remote is referring to the GitHub account, the repositories that are hosted online. Local is everything on your machine, on your computer. And what we're going to do is we're going to install Git into each of the project folders that we create, or the programs that we create in Java. And we're going to keep track of all the changes. And so we have a working directory, and that's going to be just the folder that all your files exist within. When you make a change to a particular file, Git will make note of that you have made a change. And then you can make a comment on that, and when you would make a comment, you will do a Git commit and just notate that you made a change to that file. And so we're just essentially just keeping track of everything that we do in that folder, and Git allows us to do that. Now, once we're done adding some functionality or making some changes, we're going to push up those changes to the remote repository so we can keep a copy of it there. So let's keep going here. So here's a quick program that we're going to get some practice with. So we're going to walk through this whole process together. We're going to run a few commands, and then I'll push up that repository to All right, I'm switching computers to finish this video, but what I want to do is jump right into it here. So step one, that's going to create a new Java program. So I'm going to go here. This is Visual Studio Code. I'm going to create Java project. I'm going to give, I'll say no build tools, and I'll just select the location of where I want to save this at. I'll go to my documents, and I'll go to Java videos, and I'll just name this, I'll just select the project location right now. And they'll give me a name. I can put the name in here. So this is going to be my project name, and I'll just call this Git walkthrough. I hit enter. That's going to scaffold my application. So here I have my app.java. It's what we've seen in the previous videos. What I'm going to do now is go back to my PowerPoint, and I want to copy this code. So only these 4 statements, and I want to paste that code into my main method. So just to make sure that everything is working as intended, let's go ahead and press save this, Control S, or you can say file save, and then I'll just run this to make sure my program works correctly. Everything works correctly. I get, with discount, the price is 20.7, right? So now I have an application, I have a program, and I want to install Git into this program, or into this application. What do I do, right? That's the question that we have to decide on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the folder of where this project is located. So if you remember, I saved it inside of my documents, and it's called Java videos, and then I have something called Git walkthrough. And this is the root directory of where my project exists. It's in the Git underscore walkthrough, and then if you go on the source, you'll see that's where my app.java file is located. But I want to go back to where all my files are located. And I want to install Git here. So the first step to install Git, I'm going to right click, and I'll get my bash terminal here. I can also use the terminal within Visual Studio Code, but I'll just show you how to do it with just the terminal that comes with Git. So here's the Git bash terminal. And it's important that you're in the directory that you want to version control all your files for. So here I have my Git walkthrough. And the first command you want to do is say git init, and that initializes Git into this repository. So here I have where I have my folders exposed, and so what it does is when you run a command, it installs this little bitty Git folder, and that's going to keep track of all the changes to your directory. At this point here, Git is installed into this folder, and every change you make to this folder will be tracked. So how do I know? If I run git status, there's another command. It'll show you that these are untracked files. What I want to do is immediately begin to track these files. And so I'm going to walk through what they call this workflow, the Git workflow. So if I go back a stage here, a slide here, here's the Git workflow. That's my working directory, and these are all the files in my working directory, the README, the bin, the source code. I want to move these to the staging area. The command to do that would be git add. And then I'll just use a period here, space period, to say add everything. If I want to add a single file, such as the readme.md file, I can say git add readme.md file, right? By just doing a single period here, it'll basically track all these files and add it to the staging area. So I'll hit enter. If I do another git status, you'll see that now these files have now been moved to the staging area. And then at this point, I wanted to make a note that I've installed Git, or I've initialized Git, and the way to do that is to take it from the staging area, to take it to the local repository, and to say that these files are now tracked. I can just do a git command, the git commit command. So I'll say git commit -m, adding files to staging area. I'm sorry, adding initial, as I say, initial commit. This may still seem a little confusing at this point, and that's understandable at this juncture. But more so, I would say seek to understand what is happening, and then we'll have more time to digest this going forward. So now if I run a git status, all these files is an initial commit. I've made one commit to this folder. If I do a git status, you'll see that my branch is clean. But in here, if I do a git log, which shows me everything that my timestamps, it'll show me the commits messages that I've made to this repository. So if I do a git log, you'll see that there's only one commit that says initial commit. And again, the whole thing about version control is to basically keep track of who made what change, when, and then why they made that change. So you'll see how this becomes really handy if you're working in a team environment. You can see who made what change to the file. So in this case here, I just basically installed Git and made a one commit, basically took everything in my working directory and said track everything within my working directory of my Java program. And I made a timestamp, and that's my timestamp where my mouse is hovering. So let's jump back here. So we did step one. We created a new Java program. We installed Git. We opened up the bash terminal, and we went through that workflow. So step two here is we're going to create a public repository on github.com and push our code up, right? And the thing about this is that whenever you're making changes to your code, you want to stop, make a commit about what change you're making to your code. So commit often and then push up your code to the repository after so many commits. So let's go ahead and go back to our GitHub account and show how we can actually push our local code up to a hosted repository on github.com. All right, so here's github.com, navigating to the website. I'm already logged in, and what I'm going to do here is create a new repository. Let's click on repositories, and I'll just create a new one. Green button here. And I'll just name this repository as I say. I'm going to delete this, so I'll say delete walkthrough. And I'm going to keep this repository as public. Now, if you're taking this as part of my class, I'll give you the repository. You don't have to create the repository. You just have to accept the repository. And it's not going to be your repository. It's going to be the class's repository, my repository that I'm giving to you for your programs. But let's say, for instance, that you're doing this apart from class. You will create your own repository, give it a name, make it public. You don't have to add a README at this point. We'll come back to that. But then just go ahead and just go ahead and click on Create Repository. What it's going to do is give you some initial commands. Here, the first set of commands is as though you were starting this project from anew, without a project, without the existing repository. But in this case here, we're going to use the second set of commands here. We already have an existing repository on our local machine. So we're going to copy these commands, and we're going to go back to our terminal. And you should receive an error, and I'm going to talk about what error you're going to receive here. I'm going to paste these in, right click, and paste, and I'll hit enter. Oh, you all should receive an error, but I didn't receive an error on my end because I already have the configuration. But let me just walk through what you need to do so that when you do get to this junction, you want to push up your code, you're able to do what I just did here on the screen. So let me show you what you would need to do. In this case here, everything is configured on my end. If I refresh, you'll see that the code that I have locally is now in my remote repository. But the one thing you're going to need to do on your end is that for that repository, let's go here to settings. So we could do something called SSH keys. That's one way of basically having creating a level of security between GitHub and your local machine. But I'm going to do a newer approach that GitHub released. So if you go down to developer settings, and what we're going to do is going to have a personal access token. And what I would like for you to do is generate a new token. Once you generate a new token, you're going to use that new token as, in a sense, as your password. And when you go to push up your code and git, and so you did that command git push -u origin main, most likely it's going to have you authenticate. And when you authenticate, you're going to put in your username, but then instead of actually putting the password you use to create your GitHub account, you're going to put in the personal access token that it'll give you once you create a new access token. So I'm not going to create a new one because mine is configured here, but you'll click on this generate new token, and you'll use that token to authenticate into GitHub. Okay, once you do that, you should have everything installed and everything ready to go. Let's jump back to our PowerPoint, and let's say, for instance, let's just do another walkthrough of the commands, the Git workflow. So I'm going to bring back up my application. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to change the price to 33 now, right? And I want to press save, Control S. At this point, I want to use the terminal that's within Visual Studio Code, because you remember, we can use the Git Bash terminal, this here, or we can just use a terminal that's built into Visual Studio Code. You can also have a Git Bash terminal. If you prefer the color syntax, you can do that. And if you go here, you can select Git Bash. It's basically the same thing that you see here. It's just that this one is connected to Visual Studio Code. So whatever you prefer. But in this case, I want to show you both ways. So I made a change to my file, and I press save. And again, remember, Git keeps track of the changes to your code. So if I say Git status, you'll see that something changed instead of my app.java file, right? I want to keep track of that change, and so I want to just make a note of it. So I'm going to say, I'm first going to add it to my staging area. I'll say git add, and add everything that changed. And then I'll just say git commit -m, and I'll just say updated the price variable to 33. And you want your comments to be somewhat meaningful, just in case somebody else comes behind you and start to work with your code. And we'll hit enter, and we say git status. You'll see that now our local machine is one commit ahead than our remote repository that's on GitHub. And what we need to do here is we want to push up our latest changes from a local machine to the remote repository. To do that, you're going to run a command called git push, and then origin is the alias, and then we'll say main. So we'll hit enter, and we basically saying push up to the main branch, and that was the branch that is in our remote repository. You can have multiple branches, but we'll get into branches a little bit later. But right now, we just only have one branch called main, and that's why we're pushing up to the main branch that's in our remote repository. So git push origin is the alias. That could be actually changed to a different name, but for now, just stick with origin. Git push origin main will push up the latest changes. So now if we go back to GitHub and we look at our code here, let's go back.
you'll see that in GitHub in the interface, you'll see it updated the price variable to 33. And if we go into our source code, app.java, you'll see that that change is now reflected here. And again, if we go back to our terminal here and we run a git status, you'll see that now we have 2 commits, and basically notates that there were 2 changes made to this repository. So we say git log, we have the initial commit, and then we have the update the price variable to 33. So the X item, I'm going to hit WQ, and there we go. Okay, let's jump back here to our PowerPoint. And like I said, this may seem very new and seem like, what is the point of version control? Like the commands are, it's not making sense, but that's totally fine. Once you practice with this, it'll become a lot easier, and we'll continue to get more practice with this as we go on. Here in our PowerPoint, we just went through this command here, and so we did both step 2 and step 3. You can continue to make commits to your program and keep track of it, and make sure you're making, making commits often, and then make sure after so many commits, go ahead and push up to the remote repository. So here's this kind of a review of what we just did here in terms of the Git workflow. You'll do a git init to initialize, get into the project folder. You'll make your necessary changes to the application. Typically on the first, when you first install Git, you just want to basically go ahead and say that you make a commit saying that you initialize Git. You can do a git status to see the status of your files. You'll see that on your first initial, when you do git init, everything is inside of the working directory. It'll say untracked. But you want to make sure that that is now tracked by actually doing a git commit. Git add adds it to the staging area. Git status, you can see everything and where the files are currently located. Git commit adds a timestamp and notates whatever change you're making to the project. And then git log shows the history of the timestamps and the history of all your commits. Here's a quick activity that we're going to walk through, but I would say take a stab at here so you can get these in the right order. But we'll walk through this at a different time. Last but not least is branching. All right, so branching allows you to create what appears to be a separate local repository. So here in my editor, what I've done here is I've created a different branch. So what I did, I ran a command that said git branch, and I said git branch test. I hit enter. In this case here, let's say git branch, let's say adding discount, or add discount. All one word, not separate words, right? If I do git branch, you'll see now I have 3 different branches. And what the huge benefit of branches is that you don't have to mess up the code in your main branch. You can experiment with your code, adding a discount or whatever you want to do, while the code in your main branch, almost like a whole nother replica, in your main branch is not touched. And so in this branch, right now I'm currently in my test branch, but if I want to switch to my add discount, I would say git checkout, add discount, and now I'm in the add discount branch, right? Notated here. If I wanted to, I can go ahead and say now this is going to be 43, right? And I can save this, Control S, and I'll go through that whole git workflow, git status, git add, git commit, adding price update to 43, git, and status. So this branch is now clean. But then if I switch back to my main branch, that change is not reflected in my app.java. It's only reflected within my add discount branch. And so this was really helpful, like I said, in terms of like really experimenting, but not touching your original code. You can have several different versions of the same project in different branches. And so that's a little bit about branches and experimentation. Again, a lot of these commands here, it takes practice to get familiar with doing version control via the command line. but I would encourage you to practice. I do have some videos that I'll post related to Git, and that should be those videos should be helpful in terms of getting acclimated to GitHub. So the video is getting a little long here, so I'll end it here. But stay tuned, and that concludes the series on Introduction to Java.